These days, I'm a big fan of horror, that is to say, horror done properly. I'm not a big fan of films that think a jump scare every 15 minutes is horror. I like films that base horror around the unfathomable or the confusing, horror films that leave you with a feeling of unease. As a kid though, horror was something that fascinated me. I was drawn to it like a rubbernecking driver passing a car crash on the motorway. It's dangerous to look, but you just can't help yourself. I suffered from extremely vivid nightmares as a child, and even the mildest of things would set them off. But that didn't stop me from being drawn toward things that terrified me. And I think that pull was always felt because growing up, I was invariably always being terrified by something, even if it wasn't specifically meant to terrify me. My mind often ran wild. Thinking back to the earliest things that terrified me as a kid, things that weren't necessarily supposed to, well, first there was Zelda. Zelda was the main antagonist from Terrahawks, at least I think she was. I never made it through a full episode so far as I'm aware. And when I say Zelda, what I really mean is Terrahawks as a whole. I was never a big fan of puppets and their uncanny movements on screen, but Terrahawks, design-wise, was something else. Every single character is grotesque to look at. Zelda was just the rotten cherry on an ugly muffin. It definitely started a theme, did Terrahawks. Puppets in general would absolutely terrify me, and I remember seeing a picture of Chucky from Child's Play in a book at the school library that pretty much had me convinced that all human effigies were out to kill us at some point. There was something unnerving about the lot of them, and with that, a certain fascination which I can tie into something, but we'll get back to that later. Unrelated to puppetry, there were two other films that sent my mind absolutely careening. The first was Superman 3. The Superman films weren't particularly exciting films for a kid, certainly by today's standards of superheroes with their flashy CGI and fast-paced action. They were often far slower, more grounded, and featured a lot of adults talking to each other about things I didn't understand. By the time Part 3 rolled around, the Superman series had already completely lost its way, but to me, it's the most memorable for one specific scene. This one.
Sis?
I have no idea what it is about this scene that had me so terrified, but I remember the utter shock that ran through me while I watched it at the age of maybe 8 or 9. It completely took the air out of my lungs, and for nights afterwards I had terrifying visions of being dragged into a giant machine and plastered with hunks of metal. It was a double whammy of weird for me, because I was equal parts terrified of the fact someone had been turned into a robot and how horrible that must be, and on the other side, I was terrified of the robot she'd become. Prior to this, the woman had been completely fine, but now she was suddenly murdering people. Can that happen? Is that a thing that can happen? It was a similar terror to what I felt when watching another film, equally as poor but seared into my brain nonetheless. My sister often rented films to watch with her friends, and me being a kid wanted to join in because why is everyone else having fun? I want to join in on that fun. The film she'd picked out was, if I remember rightly, rated a PG, which back in the 80s was pretty much given to any film that wasn't an 18. This film had swearing, space aliens, and bestiality, and yes, that's right, it was Howard the Duck. The film largely passed me by as being massively confusing. It was far too convoluted for my young mind to comprehend, but the character of Dr. Jennings followed a very similar arc to the robot woman from Superman 3. He becomes possessed by the evil Overlord, and after his eventual turn, everything about him changes, including his appearance and his voice. I remember watching in horror as he talked in this new, terrifying drawl, but I couldn't look away. I sat with wide eyes watching this normal man turn into someone else entirely, and then this scene happened.
I'm dead. Yes, you are.
You think that's funny, Jennings?
I'm not jetting anymore. The transformation is complete.
And I still managed to hold it together. And then this scene happened.
He must hate the chili.
And that was it. I was done. That woman right there, that woman is screaming. She's terrified. Everyone is terrified. He's blowing stuff up. No, that's it. I'm done. Nightmares for days. Alien stuff was also pretty prevalent in my nightmares. The 90s were fairly heavy on sci-fi obsessions, but the one alien encounter that scared me above any other at such a young age was the glorious 1950s movie adaptation of War of the Worlds. It was one scene in particular, the only scene in which the aliens actually leave their flying spacecraft. The thing that really affected me with this scene is this blood-curdling scream that the alien lets out as it waddles off back into the shadows. I remember being so confused by the fact that the alien, the antagonist of the film, was so terrified. It also seemed to be that if I couldn't comprehend it, then my imagination ran wild, and the scene ended up being scarier than it had any right to be. Practical effects definitely help with scenes like this though. There's a physicality to them that can't really be replicated with CGI. In another example of early fear, the skeletons of Ray Harryhausen and Jason of the Argonauts, moving on screen with a presence and uncanny fluidity, a creepy stop-motion march toward our hero before, once again, a scream that always made me dive behind a pillow. That stop-motion element of fear came to full when I picked up a certain made-for-children, I say with air quotes, claymation epic about a certain American author. I had no idea what this film was, but it had claymation in it, and back when I was 6 or 7, that's all I needed when we went to the rental shop. The Adventures of Mark Twain is a strange film in general, but The Mysterious Stranger was by far the most mysterious and strange of them all.
Fools, what fascinations there are on this planet. Strange mortals with curious customs. We'll have a storm now, and an earthquake if you like. You must stand aside, out of danger.
Funnily enough, I don't remember this scene even terrifying me as a kid, though it likely should have. I do remember it leaving a lasting impression though, and this scene from Mark Twain's claymation journey is one that I often think back to. It's fairly plain to see that as a kid there was a running theme. Puppetry or uncanny motion, a blood-curdling scream or shout, a change in personality or possession, and the foggy, childlike confusion of not understanding what is happening on screen. The good thing here though is that I can trace all of that back to a single film, one that I watched at the age of, it must have been about 6, and a film that most people may not know even exists. It was so difficult to find, in fact, that I only actually found it again about 2 years ago when I described the scene that had terrified me from my own memory on Reddit and asked if anyone could name the film. It took a couple of days, but eventually I had an answer. Joey, otherwise known as Making Contact. Now presumably because this film scarred me for life, my memories of why this film came into my possession are also burnt deep within my long-term memory. It must have been the summer holidays, and back then my mother used to run a market stall On certain days, she'd have to take me to work with her, usually if childcare couldn't be arranged, and I always remember these days being filled with long, drawn-out tedium. Nothing ever happened. It was just hours of boredom, long before handheld video games were a thing. I essentially had to sit and wait for hours on end until it was time to go home. One of my aunties had come to the stall that day, and she had a film on VHS. I can't remember the details of why she'd given it to my mum. Presumably she'd watched it, and presumably she would have known it was the most terrifying thing ever to be committed to videotape. But I remember her saying the words, "It's just like E.T., he'll enjoy it." Hearing that the film was just like E.T., which I loved, I was beyond excited to get back home. I remember the rest of that shift, I sat waiting for my mum to finish work, and I was just staring at this box, excited to get home and watch something new when I got back. Before we get to the scene that completely ruined me, however, let me just explain what Joey or Making Contact actually is, because having rediscovered it and gone back to watch it, wow, what a weird mess this is. Written and directed by Roland Emmerich. Yes, that Roland Emmerich, the only Roland Emmerich, the Roland Emmerich who went on to make Independence Day, Godzilla, The Day After Tomorrow, 10,000 BC, 2012, and other films that don't matter. He created Making Contact. Now, the film actually has two names. The original, Joey, was the name of the film as it was released in Germany. The re-release, dubbed in English, was renamed Making Contact. The name evokes a certain Steven Spielberg flavour, which is useful because this film is basically Roland Emmerich's love letter to all the homework he copied from Spielberg's back catalogue. It is unbelievable how much stuff in this film feels like a knockoff version of E.T., Poltergeist, Close Encounters, and various others. There's even references to Star Wars in there. The story, however, is absolutely off the wall due to these multiple angles of influence. Joey, our main protagonist, develops psychic powers, and through these psychic powers he starts to get phone calls from his dead dad on a toy phone in his bedroom. He also, for reasons I can't remember, comes across a ventriloquist dummy which he puts in his room, even though you only need to take a single look at this damn thing to know that shit is going to kick off. And that leads us to the scene that broke me, the thing that absolutely ruined me as a kid. This scene in which Joey gets another call from his dead dad, only to find out that it isn't his dead dad, it's an evil ventriloquist pretending to be his dead dad. This scene will forever be burnt into my mind.
What's the matter? Come on, Scooter. All right, stay. Just a minute.
Thankfully, I can watch it now in the knowledge that ventriloquist dummies aren't going to shoot laser beams out of their eyes, and the whole film in general just comes off as a fever dream of Emmerich's lust for Spielberg's success. But it's often good to know where and when something sparks an interest in you at an early age. This film, for as much as it terrified me, left me consistently fascinated with things that I was equal parts terrified of, and that drew me to watch and read and experience things I perhaps otherwise wouldn't. I can't consider it a good film, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was certainly the start of a calling toward the weird, the unknowable, and the fascinating, regardless of how many nightmares it left me with. Is there anything from your childhood that used to scare you as a kid, or left an impression from that point on? Whether it was supposed to or not, I'd be interested to hear. Stick a comment down below and I'll read it with my eyes. This video is going out a bit earlier than the rest, so just as a reminder to all, I'm now on Twitch, and hopefully I'll be going live every Tuesday and Friday, certainly for the foreseeable, and aiming for a 6:30 PM start on both days. It'll be a mix of different things, but you should be able to see my schedule on the Twitch channel, so you'll know what's what. Regardless, it'll be a mix of chatting, retro games, indie games, and honestly, just whatever I end up doing. You should know that by now. I'm all over the shop. It'll be fine. You'll enjoy it. Okay. All sleep well, don't have nightmares, etc., etc. Bye.